Howdy, folks. Welcome back to JJ's Library and Readings. Hope y'all are having a good day. Uh, I know there's a couple things going on, maybe than y'all are used to. Well, I guess by now the border's there, but got some lovely ambiance in the back, so hope that's enjoyable. If y'all hate it, please let me know. Um, Thoughts on today is hopefully I can start recording video games on Fridays. I think it'd be cool to have like a game night on Fridays. Um, Switch up the monotony of reading a little bit. Now, JJ, how do you record a video game? I have no idea. I can barely record myself reading. So, we'll have to figure that out. But thankfully, as I'm recording this, that'll be next Friday's problem. And today's only Monday. So, you know, we'll have plenty of time to figure it out. But I hope you guys got your things. Hope you're curled on your couch with your coffee. If you're smoking your cob, hopefully that's enjoyable. Maybe you have some food. I know I just slammed a can of sardines, because lean is law and everything. Only 800 or 180 calories. So, but hopefully you're having something delicious. I bet y'all maybe chomping on some popcorn or something. I don't really know. But I do know we're ready to get into it. So, we're still on Between Two Fires. But today, we're on Chapter 5 of The Thing in the Murk. Thomas slept poorly. The wine had given him a burning stomach, and when he slept, he dreamed of wading in mucky water looking for things he had dropped. He gave up at first light, still bleaching sour wine, and began to put his armor on. Christ, it tasted good going in. He had slept in his filthy padded leather gabesson as he had for months now. So he started right in putting on his armor, beginning with his cusses. He had finished buckling his second thigh piece when he stopped. The priest was sleeping heavily on the short bed, with his knees drawn up and his ankles crossed. Thomas shook him awake. The smaller man looked frightened at first to see the large, strong shadow over him, but then he remembered he had a guess. "Good morning," the priest said. "How deep is the river?" "The river? Where your monster is." "How deep? Thighs, tits, chin?" "Well, chin on me, at the deepest. Perhaps to your shoulders?" "Shit," Thomas said. "You're really going to the river, then?" "I said I would." "What we say and what we do are—" "Well, I do what I say, which is why I don't say much." Thomas stood for a moment, considering the heavy, rusty mail coat in his hands. "You're wondering about your armor?" "Yes. You only half believe there's a monster in the river, and you don't want to drown looking for it. I know of men who have been pulled under by their armor. That's real. The thing you described? I don't know. It seemed possible last night that a monster might be eating men in your river, though I've never in my life seen a monster. So this morning, can such a thing exist in sunlight? And yet it seems these are the end of days, and I think hell has open doors." "I think that too." "Spines?" the boy said. "Spines." Thomas considered the priest's soft hands and kind, almost comical face, what with his wild gray eyebrows and long beard. He didn't seem sick, though he was likely a bugger, not that Thomas had known many of the latter. "Help me with the rest of this." The priest stood and helped Thomas wiggle into his mail shirt and buckle on his shoulder pieces. "You should scour all of that," the priest said, smiling and showing Thomas his orange hands, and showing Thomas his orange hands. "Later, if your big eel eats me and shits me by the river, it should have a rust for its spice." "What, saffron? It's nearly that color." "Who can afford saffron?" "Mix it with blood and we'll have sumac," the priest laughed. Thomas put his surcoat on over everything. It was filthy and blue, and had no coats of arms on it. Now give me your sword. You want me to bless that. Where is my sword? He had propped it against the wall, and now it was gone, as was the girl. Thomas banged the door open and went outside, where the sun was now rising, peering tentatively under a scud of clouds that could swallow that would soon swallow it. He saw the girl sitting by a tree with his sword and unsheathed it next to her. She had blood on her gown. He stomped over to her, looked the sword up with one hand, and yanked her up by the arm with the other. Jesus, whore in Christ, he said, looking at the cut on the meat of her hand. It was half the length of the smallest finger and not very deep, but it was still bleeding. Do I have to watch you every second? Why can't I just sleep without you doing something stupid? I'm sorry, she said meekly. What was your idea, touching my sword? Nobody touches my sword but me. I wanted to clean it for you. Well, don't. This is what you get. He bent her arm around hurtfully to show her dripping hand to her. I want to help. You bleeding all over my things doesn't help me. You or anybody. Understand? She nodded, trying not to cry, and he noticed he was still holding her wrist, which suddenly looked very small and fragile in his big hand. He let her go. He wanted to rub it, or she wanted to rub it, but she was embarrassed and hid it behind her instead, looking up at him. He was about to bark, "What do you want now?" at her, but he thought about it and saw that she was hoping to get some kind word from him. He fished around in his head for one. Go go see the priest, he said, as gentle as he could. He may have a cloth to bind that little cut, and put some yarrow in it, since you know what that is. She obeyed him. He picked up his sword and saw that her blood was smeared on its point and the well-notched edge that had bitten her. Clumsy little witch, he said. It got darker. A drop of rain fell in Thomas's eye. The priest went to Thomas, wearing his chasuble and a thread threadbare golden stole, holding the crosser over his head while the girl walked beside them, swinging a censer with frankincense and rosemary in it. At the priest's suggestion, Thomas held his sword by the blade, inverted so the quillians made a cross of it. The rain was light now, little more than a mist, but the road was muddy enough to coat the soldier's boots and the priest's simple shoes. The girl left her shoes behind because she felt God liked bare feet better than shoes for holy work. Two men from the town came came with them. One a heavily bearded young man with an ancient boar spear, the other a fat blond farmer with blond porcelain bristles on his jowls, armed with a billhook for hedges. Both wore straw hats. The smaller one looked scared, as did the priest. They had both been to the river to see the thing's signs, but not the farmer. The farmer was pissed drunk. Thomas reminded himself to stay well away from him if a fight started, because he was stout and thick-armed and likely to get friend and foe alike. Among the bitterer lessons of brigandage Thomas had learned was that farmers were strong, often stronger than the horsemen who despised them, and that they lived so close to starvation that they would fight like bears to hold on to what crumbs and bits of woods or leather they owned. If the priests hoped their procession would draw fresh recruits from the houses they passed, he was disappointed. A few women peered at them from windows, all crossing themselves, and on the outskirts of town, one bare-ribbed dog looked up at them briefly before going back to breakfast on the foot of a corpse leaned up against a sheep wall. The body had a flour sack over his head at least, but it had stained the sack, and it stank even in the cool rain. Sheep's bones littered the field past the wall. Sheep had fared as poorly as men in this scourge, and the signor's keep came into view around a stand of alder trees. The pilgrims marched up to the gate, where Thomas pulled a leather cord that rang a bell on the battlements. He waited the time it took the swaying fat farmer to piss against the wall. The priest admonished him with his name Sanson, but was waved away with the man's free hand, and then Thomas rang the bell again. After a third tug on the cord, a very pale young man with plucked and red-drawn eyebrows looked down at them from the wall. He held a crimson woolen cloak squared over his head, presumably to protect fine clothes they couldn't see from their angle. "If you're not here to buy again, then go your ways," he said. "Good herald," the priest said, "please let us speak to Guillemene. Guillaume has fallen. I am sensible now. You may speak to me. Then I will say a mass for Guillaume and rejoice in your good fortune. We have not come here to buy again, which you know we cannot afford, or to rent your mill, for we have nothing to grind, or your oven, for we have nothing to bake. Rather, we offer your master the chance to win God's love in battle." "Go away," he said simply, and disappeared. Thomas felt his anger rise. "Harold!" he shouted, making the skinny man flinch. No answer came from above. "Horse and ass sniffling Harold!" The herald reappeared. "Who has the insolence to speak to me that way? When you speak to me, you speak directly to my lord. Then tell your lord to get his little prick out of his wife and help us kill the thing in the river." "You common bastard," the herald yelled. "I'll have you known we still have men at arms in here." "Then tell them to stop husbanding their hands and come down to the river. Something is killing your people. It's called the plague, you idiot," the herald said more quietly and disappeared again. Thomas's worst insults didn't bring him back this time, so he grabbed the cord and yanked with all his might, grinning at the sound of the bell coming loose and clanging down stone steps somewhere above them. The five of them gasped at what they saw. Tracks in the muddy bank, like a snake would make, but much larger, had beaten under all the grass close to the river and crisscrossed in loops between here and the town. It was visiting the town now. The piles of foul shit the priest had described were still here, full of bones and cloths. A woman's severed leg lay white but mud spattered just by the bank. There was nothing less than a visitation from hell. The priest, quite pale now, began to pray paslums in Latin, and he urged the girl to swing the censer, which she did. The man with the big beard started shaking. Thomas said quietly, "Priest, if it goes badly for us, run like a young man and take the girl. She'll try to stay, but don't let her." The priest never stopped praying, but nodded, which Thomas didn't see because he kept his eyes fixed on the milky gray waters of the river. He went forward at a crouch, with his sword at the ready. The stout drunk one with the bill hook came next, and the beardy one barely walked forward at all, staying close to the priest and the girl. Thomas was as taut as wire. Step, step, step. He froze when something moved in the water near the pilings of the collapsed bridge. Something like an oily black arm, but the width of a draft horse chest. He wasn't entirely sure he had seen it. Then all of them said some variant of "My God," when its head broke the water's surface. Wide-eyed, a flat-headed, like some giant cross between eel, newt, and frog, it laid its head on the bank and felt around with long whiskers around its mouth and eyes until it found the woman's leg. Its tongue darted out and lashed onto the leg with a thatch of evil little hooks at its tip, pulling it under the water with it, bending a growth of sweet flag rushes. They sprang back up. The water foamed and then flowed gently again, as if none of it had happened. Those white eyes, a grandfather's blind eyes. The small beardy man dropped his boar spear and ran so fast his hat blew off him. The stout one stood open-mouthed, then vomited, but he didn't run. Rather, he followed Thomas right up to the edge of the water, which floated gently now and showed no signs of the thing. "Please, Sir Knight, please protect me in this fray." "Wipe your chin," Thomas said. "Now what?" He was so heavily armored he dared not to go far into the water. But when his slapping of the water with the flat of his blade and his shouts of "Ho ho! There! Bring your ugly ass out of the water and fight me," failed to rouse it, he ventured first one leg and then the other into the softly flowing Murk. The big farmer stood near him, wide-eyed, shocked, sober, his arms so tense the end of the bill hook quivered. "Hand me the boar spear," Thomas said. The farmer did as he told, fetching and handing over the wickedly pointed spear. Thomas put his sword in his hand and began to use the spear to probe the water in front of him. He jabbed at it viciously, hoping to gouge the thing into surfacing. It didn't. Thomas went a little further in. He looked at the burned peelings, wondering if it nested down there, curling itself around them. Perhaps he should wade over there. He could use them to help him keep his head above water. The wind blew harder and the rain came down, threatening to snuff the girl's censer, which she still swung dutifully. The priest's Latin prayers were harder to hear. Thomas altered between stabbing the water with the spear and slapping it with the sword's flat until it seemed to him he was wasting his time. What, you only kill mules and fishermen? You only take the legs off fishwives? Come and get me. Me! He said, his voice cracking a little. Rain poured into the armor and down his face, making him blink. Relief that the thing didn't want to fight him blended with shame at that relief, but then relief won out. Perhaps a few more stabs at the base of the peelings, and then he would say he's done his best. He slapped the surface of the river half-heartedly again, then began backing out of the mucky water, and tripped. He put his booted heel down on a submerged log in the mud behind him. The log slithered out from under his foot at great speed, causing him to fall and hurl the sword behind him. He thrashed in the water and sputtered, getting to one knee with difficulty, cocking his spear arm. Part of the thing coiled through the water in front of him. He lunged at it with the spear, twisting his body into it with the brutality that hours in the tilt yard had made as natural for him as walking. The spear stuck deep. That lunge would have impaled one man and killed the man behind him, but this was no man. The thing coiled rapidly away from him, wrenching the spear from his grip. He stood up with great effort, the sodden chain mail trying to drag him under, and launched himself towards where the sword had fallen. He saw that the girl was looking for it too, up to her thighs in dark water, her little limbs white against the river and darker sky. She bent down fully into the water now, her face submerged as though she were hunting turtles. He tried to yell, "Get back!" at her, but could only cough, so he reached into the water, grabbed a fistful of her blonde hair, jerked her up and towards the bank. She had the sword by the blade, getting cut again as she fell and dropped it. He saw where it fell, though, and saw her clambering through the mud and up to the bank. The priest was warning to fetch her. Thomas grabbed the sword and wheeled around to the river, sensing he had had his back to it for too long a fall of seconds. "Watch! Watch!" the priest was yelling over the rain. He turned to see the thing slithering towards him just under the water, its flat, froggy head as big as two tournament shields, its obscene whiskers trailing behind it, the spear making an S pattern in the water because it was still stuck in the thick of it. It was easily 20 paces long, the water rolling over it hypnotic, almost beautiful. Its head broke the surface now, and his whiskers flickered forward and whipped him. Thomas heard splashing to his right, but ignored that, keeping his eye on the monster and bringing his sword up. It opened its mouth wider than it should have been able to, showing its sickly white inside and rows of teeth the length of long fingers. Thick, clear liquid poured out of it. It coiled its body up behind its open mouth in preparation for the strike. As Thomas readied himself to die plugging his sword down its throat, something flashed at the edge of Thomas's vision, and he saw the bill hook come down with great force on the side of the thing's head, opening up a white blueberry wound in it and making it hiss. The bill hook fell again and again. The farmer was going at it like he was hacking down a tree, his red mouth pursed with the effort. Thomas struck it with its sword now, cleaving a horrible wound in its nose and mouth, for which it recoiled, doubling back on itself under the water with a great splash. Once it was out of reach, it broke the surface again, rearing up to show its white belly, on which pairs of backward-facing, curved, black spines the size of paring knives were arrayed like teats. It hissed at them with the spines flexed and oozed black fluid all over its body. It had oily fins in the sides of its neck, ending it more spines. Now its tail rose up out of the water, and the farmer crossed himself and whimpered. The tail had a human hand at the end of it, so white it was nearly translucent, brought against the black sky. A fucking hand! The tail slithered forward now, and the hand groped the side of the thing until it found the spear stuck in it, which it pulled out. Thunder grumbled behind it. The farmer started whimpering an Ave Maria, and it cocked its head, listening, its whiskers whipping excitedly. Thomas banged his fist uh, heavily on the stout man's shoulders to shut him up, but he only prayed louder. Without warning, a ripple went through the thing, and the end of its tail lashed like the end of a whip. The hand released the boar spear, and it flew at the farmer as though it had been shot from an arbalest. It would have skewered him right through his praying mouth had not Thomas shoved him. As it was, it laid open his neck and his temple, and he screamed horribly. Then the creature did the worst thing Thomas had seen yet. It opened its mouth and exactly imitated the farmer's scream. It moved towards the men again. The farmer just kept screaming, even as it mocked him, holding his hand against his head where the blood ran thin and fast in the rain. Thomas had never been so afraid. I can't, he thought, even as he drove his legs forward through the muck to meet it. Thomas swung hard at its head, but he only hit a glancing blow as it lunged past him and grabbed the screaming farmer, cutting off his screams as it took the man's head and shoulders into its mouth with a violent, wet, slapping sound. It contracted the muscles in its neck now and lifted the heavy farmer out of the water, pointing his kicking feet at the sky and trying to swallow him in repeated gulps. Boof, 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 like a pelican trying a big fish. Thomas saw the end of the farmer's bill hook sticking out of the water. He sheathed his sword so as not to loose it, then sloshed over to grab the polearm. The thing was having trouble getting the farmer down. Thomas slashed at it with all his considerable strength, gouging tears in it that would have gutted an ox. One of these, driven high, opened a hole near the lump the thing was trying to swallow, and Thomas was treated to the sight of the farmer's white face turning as he went further into its gullet. It could no longer ignore the strong man tearing at it, though, so it turned its blind face towards him, the other man's feet sticking out of its mouth. It lashed its whiskers at Thomas to find him, then slithered the tail hand up around his leg. It dropped its head and neck into the water now and slithered more of its coils around the nuisance who had been chopping at it. It formed it foamed the water with its spasm as it continued trying to swallow its meal, but now its back half was free to fight. Thomas dug at it underwater with the point of his weapon, gouging it so its oily blood floated up, but then the awful white hand came at his face, grabbing his cheek excruciatingly, digging for his eyes. He wrenched his head back and forth, then drove the weapon into the riverbed so he could find the shaft again. He was not strong enough to pull the hand away from his face, however, and he felt something sharp scrape his cussy as the thing constricted around his leg. Whoring spines, he squealed crazily, standing wide and struggling to keep his footing, now jerking the hand's thumb back as he would break a man's grip. With the other hand, he found the knife on his belt and began to saw where the hand joined the tail. His knife bit deep, and it withdrew the hand to save it, then jerked, pulling Thomas's underwear. He felt sure he would die now, but he didn't give up. He wrestled and arched and managed to get half his sword free. Though it was no easy task with the black coils around his legs and those evil spines scraping his chainmail, and he bent into a coil of it and started using his weight behind the half-exposed blade to cut. It thrashed, jerking him around madly on the muddy bottom. Through his head broke the water, and he managed to get a breath in. A sword came out of its scabbard, and he held on it for his life. It was then that one of the spines at the bottom of it found purchase and punched through his armor at the groin, where a few snapped links of chain he had meant to have mended allowed a small opening. It was enough. He ground his teeth together against the pain and nearly lost the last of his air, but instead drove his sword into it hard, causing it to release him entirely. He broke the surface of the water and got heavily to his feet as the thing's head came up, its first meal now down near the middle of it, but it was Thomas who moved first, lunging at its neck. He got there before it could face him and leaned into his sword, driving it through the monster and driving the monster down until he felt his point bite rock on the other side. He pulled the sword half out and changed the angle, leaning into it again and using the strength of his legs against the river bottom to punish like a plowman, blowman, I guess. No, I'm just kidding. Plowman. And slit a huge gash into it, through which a black stinking fluid now poured. It thrashed violently, but Thomas held on even though the world was beginning to get dark. He summoned what felt like the last of his strength and pushed the sword towards where he hoped the heart was. It punched through something. The thing shuddered and turned on him now and bit him, taking his head and neck into its mouth as it had done with the peasant. But though the pressure on his chest was terrible, its strength was ebbing, and its teeth did not pierce his chain. Thomas screamed hoarsely in the darkness of its mouth, and then wouldn't scream any more as it took him under water. Water and foul issue flooded its mouth, and Thomas began to black out. Then it shuddered again and vomited. It vomited Thomas into the river, along with the dead farmer, someone's head, the woman's leg, and any number of eels. Thomas fought to keep his head above the water, praying the priest would haul him out, but he was alone and dying. With his heavy armor on him in the river, he would have to save himself. He heard it thrashing, and then the thrashing stopped. He thought was dead, but didn't think he had the strength both to turn and look at it and to keep from falling in the river. He hauled himself to the shallow part and nearly collapsed, but he knew he would still drown if he did, so that his leg going numb from the thing's spine in its groin, and the river and the black sky seeming to spin around him as if he were a bead in a toy top. He crawled through the mud on his 3 good limbs until his face was far out of the river, so he knew he would not breathe any in. His legs were still in the water. If it wasn't dead, it would drag him under, but he didn't care now. Something was banging on his armor and helmet. Hail. It was hailing. So this is the end of the world, he thought, feeling nauseated, hoping to pass out, and he passed out. What a chapter! That was awesome. I didn't know there was going to be mythical creatures in this. I thought they were going to go and it would be a, I don't know, a trap, but like just not real. But that was good. I wonder what happened to him. He passed out. I wonder if the thing died. I have no idea. Man, that's going to be such a good episode tomorrow. I hope y'all tune in, and I hope that y'all have a absolute wonderful night. Get some great sleep and sweet dreams. Till next time.